So here we have 5 different departments: and ocean atmospheres, life science, which is like marine biology and ecosystems, geosciences, marine geosciences, and a department called marine ecosystems and society. So it's like, what are the sort of societal implications of? So the history of the school really, I think, came about because both atmosphere and marine science, and it has maintained that character. So there's all kinds of fabulous research going on here. If you were here longer, I would take you to the wind wave interaction tank, which is you pass on the way in. It's the only facility, I think, in the world where you can simulate Category 5 hurricane conditions blowing over water, seawater, that is pumped in from right here. There's also seawater labs there, lots of living organisms there, like aplysia, sea slugs. They use it in neuroscience research because they're unusual physiology. And then there's chemistry labs over there, looking at things like how chemistry, atmospheric chemistry impacts air quality and climate, clouds. My own research is, I'm in the Department of Atmospheric Science, and there's several of us that do research on climate change here. So my research we use climate models in order to make predictions about the future. And we also, in my own particular flavor of climate modeling research, is using models to try to, as experimental tools, that you can sort of turn things on and off and see and try to understand the system better by leaving things out. So I've spent a lot of my career working on that, sort of deconstructing climate models, these massive, complex machinery that need basically supercomputing centers to run on, and individual scientists can't necessarily run it themselves. They can, but they won't get very much unless they have some kind of heavy machinery. And so taking that complex machinery and stripping it down to its essentials.
And what are the current predictions?
It's getting warmer and wetter. The sea level is rising. Now, one thing that I, in my research, look at is it gets, in a global mean sense, it gets warmer and wetter pretty much every year. And the sea level goes up pretty much every year. But in any given region, there's other factors at play. And in the Atlantic, around the Atlantic basin, there are periods of time where the warming rate and sea level rise are accelerated, and then there are periods of time in the past where that's kind of leveled off. And so we're trying to understand what are the causes of those kind of wiggles about the global warming trend. And they can last for multiple decades. So the classic example is in the period of time like in the 70s and 80s, the Atlantic was in a relatively cold state compared to the rest of the world. The rest of the world had warmed a lot. The Atlantic was unusually cold for several decades. And if you look at the hurricane record, that's a period of time where there were infrequent hurricanes. And so while overall the Atlantic has been warming, there are these fluctuations that and part of my research is trying to understand that. So taking a climate model and stripping out different pieces and seeing what are the processes in the climate system that can give you these changes, long-term changes.
And what kind of period is Miami in right now? Because I just learned that somebody said there wasn't really a major hurricane in 11 years or something. Is that,
Yeah, so we've been in a period where we're kind of in this sustained warm period, probably warming just about as fast as the global mean temperature. So whatever those factors were that were playing a role earlier are not for this particular decade. There is the 2004-05 was the peak hurricane season, which coincided with sort of the peak warming rate in the Atlantic. mean, but it's cautionary tale is a good one to remember, which is that in 1992 was a period of very quiet hurricanes.
Mm-hmm.
That was the year of Hurricane Andrew.
Mm.
So, just because you have a quiet year doesn't mean the big one is not going to hit in that year.
What are the assumptions or predictions for this year or the following year?
NOAA just released their seasonal forecast, and their prediction is there'll be slightly more active season than normal. But I think that, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's a 17 named storms. There have been years where they ran out of letters in the alphabet.
Oh.
So there have been really, really active years, and this one is, I think, expected to be moderately active. The biggest predictor of what happens in the Atlantic actually comes from the Pacific, which is El Nino.
Mm-hmm.
During an El Nino year, there tend to be fewer hurricanes.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now there's no El Nino, so that's not happening. So this warming period that we're in may actually result in somewhat more hurricanes.
And regarding the accuracy with the predictions for hurricanes, is there when major hurricanes like Katrina or Sandy happen, have they been predicted like weeks before, months before, or was it just like on
the typical there's a 3-day, 5-day forecast.
Mm-hmm.
You can see them start to bubble up, but you can't tell. When they start to bubble up in the eastern Atlantic, or in the Gulf, you don't have really more than 5 days predictability. But 5 days is a lot of time if you're preparing for something. It's another question that probably ties to things you've thought about is how people take in the information of the forecast and what they do about it. And it turns out that it's not really obvious how to communicate that information in the most effective way.
And how are you communicating it right now?
Well, I would say that's not really my field of research of making those seasonal forecasts. I don't make them myself. They are communicated, on websites and through press releases and, reporting. But
in your own research?
in my own research, how do I communicate the results to the general public? I would say I haven't been as good at that as I probably should be. I've done press releases on certain papers. When a paper we think that is sort of in a high-profile journal like Science or Nature, we've done press releases. We did a video actually that you can see that went with the press release, just a little explanatory video. So that's one way. I mean, my main way of let's say sharing what I learn is either through the scientific literature, which is only read by a small number of experts. But the main way I have an impact is through teaching. So I teach a lot of undergrad and grad classes on climate change to students of all really different backgrounds. A lot of them are meteorology, oceanography students, but some are coming from marine conservation or natural hazards, or so I really put a considerable amount of effort and love into that. I don't it's part of my job. It's what I get paid to do, but I take it very seriously. Part of my job.
Well, how do you think there are ways to improve the communication between the general public and the scientific research? And if so, how?
Well, this is gonna probably sound like I have a biased perspective because I'm an educator, but I do think that scientific literacy has to take place in the classroom. And you can get people motivated and interested by going, by having people reading articles or newspaper articles or books, but you may disagree with this coming from a self-taught background, but I do think that it's getting people to get their hands dirty with the concepts.
Mhm.
Maybe it's data, maybe it's in the lab, maybe it's just the scientific method.
Mhm.
That is the basis on which climate change communication has to be built.
Mhm.
Otherwise, without I would say that kind of engagement with the topic, that you can lose interest or misunderstand, because you get a certain amount of information and you're not necessarily getting it, you're not really engaged with the topic.
Mhm.
That's my biased perspective.
Do other people, like journalists or people, just like approaching the university or researchers sometimes and asking for something?
Definitely. Yeah, and I've done interviews on radio interviews, television. There's a interview when there was a big El Nino event brewing,
Mhm.
and I did a radio NPR interview with David Green,
Mhm.
and a lot of people heard that.
Mhm.
Friends, they're like, I haven't seen you since graduate school, and what are you doing? It was interesting because I had this was in 2014-15 El Nino event. The last really big El Nino event had been in 1997, and I was a grad student at the time, and I was getting calls to talk to like CNN. This is what I was telling you about earlier, and so it was kind of interesting to be like in the national news again, only 15 years later, 20 years later. So yeah, I always make an effort to do that, but I there was a really nice show on Al Jazeera America. They had a really great science show called Techno. Really interesting. I don't know if it's on the air anymore, but they like really dove into the science and came and got a whole tour of the lab and talked with lots of different researchers and really sort of spelled out the questions of climate change, what we know, what we don't know.
And what kind of tips can you give people, just like simple steps, like about like self-information maybe, or just in terms of actions, what they could do regarding the topic of climate change, rising sea levels?
What they can do.
Yeah.
I think that informing yourself is good, and I would recommend there's a number of different resources. One is the U.S. National Climate Assessment is a good one to get informed about what's going on in your part of the country. If you're in Southeast Florida, the Southeast Florida Climate Compact has a really nice website and a report that really spells out what we know and what we don't know about sea level rise here and impacts on rainfall. So those are two resources that I go to often. The state of the science of climate research is really well described in the IPCC reports, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They're all publicly available. I don't have a copy of it, but I don't have a copy of the latest version because I couldn't lift it. But this is the 2007 report. There was a 2013 report, and this is one of 3 volumes, or one of 3 parts. This is the working group 1, and there's a 2 and 3. This is a physical science. If you want to get informed about this, this is the 2007 report. But if you go to ipcc.ch, you'll see the complete 2013 report. But that said, as you can imagine from the size of this, it's not extremely, I would say, user friendly. And if there's a topic within climate change that you want to dive into, you can do that in a useful way in these reports.
And regarding actions, what can somebody do in their own daily life in terms of habits or engaging in community? What would you recommend?
Well, so some of the things that people have thought were most, some of the things that are most popular in terms of solutions, like replacing your light bulbs, those aren't bad to do, but then we're subject to this idea, sort of single action bias. So you put in a light bulb and like, there, I'm done, I don't have to worry about it. So there are other things at a household level that you can do that are more impactful. Like if everybody took a 1 minute shorter hot shower, if everybody washed their clothes on cold, you know, instead of hot water. Those are really big energy savers. I would say, I should have an answer to this ready for you, but because let me just think about it for a minute. I'm feeling a little pressure. Yeah, you're a good interview, but
carbon footprint or whatever.
no, I mean, those are all things that maybe I can restate the obvious, but I feel like there is a sense of frustration people have that's like, okay, well, I can do my own little part, but it's such a little part. I feel like there needs to be a scaling up thing. And it's true, you do things in your community because you can and you have control over it. Like we have a citizens group in Coconut Grove here, and it's called Grove 2030. And one of our actions is to develop a response plan for our parks, which are in Coconut Grove at waterfront, and they're literally flooded part of the year already now. I mean, you can go. There are parts of the parks that you cannot get to now.
Because of rising sea levels?
Yeah. And so the citizens group is like, we have to do something about this. Now, what is there to do? I mean, we're not going to put pumps in. But one of the things that we're trying to do is to say, can we design, and fortunately, I'm the chair of this group, but fortunately there's all these landscape architects and engineers on it, so we have some of the technology to suggest things. Again, this is a citizens group, so it's just a bunch of citizens getting together, but to take action. And say, okay, well, we have to be smarter about adapting to this fact of sea level rise here, because people aren't, we're not addressing it. I mean, people do cite Miami Beach as an example of really of proactive adaptation, installing pumps to prevent flooding during, so they call it sunny day nuisance flooding. So that'll work for a while, but it only affects part of Miami Beach, and there are negative consequences too so it's not it's not that everybody wins from that. So we're trying to take a more integrative approach to say, well, there's some like design principles where you create ways to let the water in a way that doesn't have a negative impact. And also then as an opportunity to say, this is happening, and we're doing something about it. So I guess I would say that in addition to the carbon footprint, which is I completely endorse. I mean, I try to ride my bike every day, which I'm not always good at, but I pretty much can. And do public transportation when you can. And, so reduce what you can of your carbon footprint, but we're still living in this society. But I think that action that leads to awareness and a demonstration of change at a larger scale, so that people can be thinking smarter about going forward and developing new technologies to be able to either consume energy differently and or produce it differently. And that has to happen eventually, and it will, but the sooner we get going on it, the better. And I'm not an expert in macroeconomics, but my feeling as a citizen, or my observation, is that their incentives to do this are not there in a way that's making things happen quickly. And I think with public pressure or public demand, that will be so as as soon as we start making demands that, you know, we need in Florida to be able to capture solar energy and plug it back into the grid. We need to be able to have those technologies available not just to people who can afford it, but widespread. And I think that so what are the steps we take to get there? Some of the steps that we take are by bringing people along with the idea.
That's such a beautiful, communal gathering you did, and how, I mean, it sounds like that could be something other people could do in Miami, the county, or anywhere. And so how did that happen? I mean, also
it's really
like different
actually
citizens coming together with different expertise, and just like somebody who wants to work hands-on.
totally
and
grassroots.
How did just meeting?
I would say that there's a couple residents of Coconut Grove. Coconut Grove is a unique part of Miami where it has a long history of kind of rich cultural diversity too, Bahamian settlements here, and you should come visit. And it's also, when you fly over Miami, there's a strip of green canopy that you can see, and that's Coconut Grove. So it's almost an accident that it happened to. I don't think there's any specific zoning to Coconut Grove that keeps it that way, but so it's created a little bit of a culture within, what's called a community within Miami, and there were some citizens that were like, hey, things are changing in ways in Coconut Grove in ways that we would like to be able to have some input on, rather than have outside forces, whether it's climate change or development or retail or government or any of the, without those outside forces coming in and dictating the way this is going. And so some citizens got together and said, we're gonna actually, they did a visioning exercise, it was called. So brought all these people together and said, like, what do you want Coconut Grove to look like in 2030? And all these different groups independently kind of came up with almost very similar overlapping topics, and then they put together a vision statement that everybody pretty much agreed with. And then we're taking that vision statement and turning it into actions by certain different groups. So there's a transportation group, there's a parks group, that's the one I'm involved in, and it's called Grove 2030. Yeah, I mean, you're right. When you ask what should I do about this, and I sort of look at myself and say, I'm a climate scientist, what am I doing? Getting involved in local actions that scale up. So not stopping at the household level, but trying to scale up. It's not easy to do. You have to, bring people along sometimes, but it is, it meets, I think, the top-down approach somewhere, and it will, once we have people running the federal government that are want to meet on that issue.
And how did you, just on a very practical level, like how did you guys communicate? Because sometimes there are communities, but then are the people talking, and how can they all, was it a newsletter? Like how?
There's a newsletter now, there's a website and a newsletter. I would say it's still a work in progress though. This climate piece that within a bigger piece that, so I was sort of asked to move that forward, and so I took that on, and I basically, made a phone call, and we meet once a week. Once a month.
But you knew people already, so you called to a neighborhood, and then people knew each other. Just like how could people start this kind of action?
Well, there was already a visioning statement group that was like 150 people, and it was that happened a couple of years ago. So there was already like a community kind of people that were interested or not. I mean, maybe they left the meeting like, I'm not interested. But there was a group of people involved in that, and so that's sort of the basis, and it's grown from there. And so when we meet people, oh, you live in the Grove? Oh, you're interested in climate change? You need to be involved in this. And so that's kind of how it happened. I have not been involved in grassroots activities like this much before, and it is all I have a lot of experience being on a faculty with sort of a distributed like power mode where, you know, and committees, you know, working through committees is really common for us. But this issue of trying to just even bring people to the table and then get them engaged and keep them engaged is a whole new challenge.
And then when you, there are a few different, you mentioned some papers or resources before.
Yeah.
If you can just like name a few like websites or organizations where people can just look up things and just out of, you know, what comes to mind.
On climate.
Yeah, on
Learning
rising
about
sea levels, on your own research maybe. and
Okay,
others.
yeah, they can go to the Erasmus website, www.rsmas.miami.edu, and find me and all manner of other really interesting research that's going on here, on, like I said, everything from fish to atmospheric chemistry to, you know, rocks beneath the ocean, ancient rocks, you know, underneath the Bahamas, and yeah, so I would recommend going to the Erasmus website for sure.
And you can just like email the scientists and ask questions and so like
Well, now that's where it gets a little bit hard because scientists, like you could say, we're sort of antisocial people, so we like to go off in our corner and do our own little thing. What time is it? Just
okay, yeah, okay. And then
hold on, let me just check because I can't be late for this,
yeah,
and I
okay.
like 2 minutes.
Okay, so, yeah, and then maybe just like some other websites where you highly recommend besides the ones you like in terms of action.
Where do I go? Well, if you want to really get your hands dirty, there's a really nice website that explains all of the climate data that's out there, and it's a climate data guide at ucar.edu. I can send you the link if you want. So that's one where if you really want to like learn about the data that tells us the story. Like I said, the IPCC is a really good resource because it has everything there, but you can actually download the data yourself if you want and look at it. Yeah. I mean, and when I say the data, it's not like there's one data set, and you can get a sense of it from reading the IPCC report. It's literally like all different data sets from all over the world, measuring different quantities from different researchers. So it's from space, from the surface, from below the surface, and floats in the ocean, and yeah. I'm trying to think if there's a good, you know, can I maybe think about it and email you if something comes up? You know, what I find is that a lot of stuff gets is either kind of dated. Like was involved with NSF, did this thing on clouds and climate, which was at the time it was like 2010. It's like really out of date now. It's still available, and it was supposed to be a collection, you know, resource collection of what's available on the topic, and they did videos, interviews, and it would have been, you know, and it just didn't quite meet the expectation of like. I had some students review it for a class. Like they're not really, they're kind of dancing around some of the issues. I still want to know about X. I still want to know what. So I feel like there's not a great resources on this. But those ones that I gave you, the National Climate Assessment, Southeast Climate Compact, this, and Rasmus's website, it's a good start. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Exhale completely.